Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and today I'm reviewing Authority and Acceptance, the second and third volume in Jeff VanderMeer's Southern Reach trilogy, and possibly the most difficult review I've ever had to film, for reasons that will become clear in the course of the video. But the first thing I have to say, by the way, I'll talk about Authority in the first half of the video, Acceptance in the second half. I'll keep the two separated. And first thing I have to say is that I have a lot of respect for the Southern Reach trilogy. I'm very glad I read it. I can definitely see how some people may definitely love the trilogy extensively as a whole, and I absolutely 100% adored Annihilation, the first volume in the series. I read it recently, filmed a review. It was such an amazing experience, such a fascinating, faceted novel with so many sinister implications and so many narrative games going on. I've been writing about it. It was just so amazing, and I have a lot of respect in particular for what VanderMeer did with Authority, which is follow up a novel such as Annihilation with something completely different. Authority is a completely different novel, both in its form and its content. When it comes to its form, Annihilation's fascinating first-person narrative, which reflected also extensively on the nature of first-person narratives, on the way the main character, the biologist in Annihilation, was playing you up to a certain point, keeping things from you, revealing other things, giving you her reasons why she was doing that. She was, in a way, a particular form of unreliable narrator. Authority is a book that plays with third-person narration. It plays in particular with the distance between what the character, the main character of the novel, knows and what the reader knows. Keep in mind that this is, just as Annihilation, it's a novel that uses hypnosis extensively as a plot device and plays with that idea very much. One thing I have to say is that if you've read Annihilation a long time ago, it's probably a good idea to reread it before you read the second and third volume in the series, because you're going to be required to know, to remember several key phrases, several key elements from Annihilation in order to understand Authority to the full. When it comes to the plot and the setting of the novel, Authority is also extremely quintessentially different. Annihilation's exploration of this bizarre, mysterious, cryptic Area X is followed by a novel set almost entirely in a government building, the building where the Southern Reach is located, the agency that supposedly studies this Area X. And it sounds a bit, the premise behind Authority, the fact that it's about a guy who is meant to look into the work of this government agency, makes it sound like the science fictional / horror version of The Pale King by David Foster Wallace's, famously set in the IRS. And there is, I think, an element of boredom in the novel. In the first 50 pages of the book, I have to admit I had some difficulties connecting with the motives of the characters and the reasons behind the whole action, because it all felt quintessentially boring, even though we are talking about potentially catastrophic events and what may or may not be an alien invasion. But that potential boredom is completely offset and is completely balanced by the mysteriousness of the whole thing, by the sinister nature of this Area X, by the fact that the people who come into contact with it are so changed so thoroughly, and that there are so many secrets involved within the Southern Reach. How many expeditions have gone into Area X? What happened to them? What's going on all over the place? Why are people so creepy? Which still may potentially lead into a pitfall that I do believe Authority does fall into head first. And I'm also talking about Acceptance. I'm talking about the Southern Reach as a whole, at least the second and third volume in the series. At one point in the novel, a character reflects that if he wasn't careful, everything will be magnified, misconstrued, until each frame of a movie he's watching carried the promise of menace. And that happens with the novel, with every you can substitute every frame of that movie with every page of this novel. This is in a way that you know that horror trope you find in horror movies all the time, where there's a character looking around an abandoned house and they look behind a corner and you expect a jump scare, but oh no, it's just Uncle Gigi having a cup of coffee. Authority is full of that all over the place. What's going on in this place? What's going to be inside this drawer? Oh, it's a plant. Oh, what's happening with that guy? Where is he going? Oh, he is disappearing behind a strange door. Yeah, nothing much happens. And I'm not saying this to be a dick, because it's not like you don't have the occasional moment of, wow, this is really bizarre and cryptic, but the expectations the novel builds up, especially if you carry with you the strangeness and the shock of Annihilation, is never corresponds to an adequate reward. I'd like to draw a parallel with Lost, the very famous TV show, which was very good at building up all these fascinating mysteries, but generally speaking very bad at then giving you a rewarding explanation for these mysteries that also made sense. I should also mention that the novel has a tendency to alternate a lot between timelines, which may be a way to suggest the disorientation of this main character, who has clearly faced a traumatic experience in his past he hasn't completely made peace with, and also is under a lot of strain, to say the least. But the novel keeps jumping back and forth between past events and present events in the span of a few paragraphs, and you're following a scene, and then the scene is interrupted and the scene is carried on maybe several chapters later, all of which is great but also rather tiring and not entirely justified by your interest. What I mean is that occasionally these scenes that are broken and then carried on later, it's not like I had any need to see how that scene ended. It's not like it was such a compelling scene I wanted to know more about it, and that carried me through all the difficulty I have to navigate. Overall, I have to admit I wasn't that much a fan of Authority. I liked some of the way it builds up some of its mysteries. I didn't really like what it did with them. I felt like it felt very much like a bridge between Annihilation and Acceptance. But what about Acceptance? What about the final volume in the series? Acceptance does a bit of both. It's a bit like a mixture between Annihilation and Authority. You follow all the characters you've come to know in the course of the series, has several parallel storylines, some of them set in the present, some of them set in the past. You get lots of flashbacks that kind of explain the few holes you still didn't know about the story of these people, but more on that in a second. And on a narrative level, it is definitely more fascinating than Authority. I enjoyed it much more. You get a mixture of different styles. You get a passage in the middle of the novel that recuperates Annihilation's first-person narrative. You get some narratives set in the past. You get second-person narration, which is usually awkward, and it doesn't feel awkward at all here. It's very well handled, and you get to know some of the characters you only knew in passing better. And most notably, you get what the series had been promising but never delivered, which is a giant monster at one point, but it's only for a couple of pages really. You see, the point with Acceptance, and probably with Authority too, and what I'd like to point as the reason why I didn't really enjoy too much the second and third volume in the series, is that to me it didn't feel that they added much to what Annihilation had already said. In terms of plot, you are not really better off, you don't quite have a clearer picture after reading the whole trilogy. Actually, part of me feels that that the ending of Annihilation made for a much more satisfying closure than what you get once you've read the second and third volume in the series. That's one thing I have to say about the Southern Reach trilogy. It doesn't feel at all, once you've read the first volume, Annihilation, like you've just had part of a story. Far from it. Sure, through these books you get to know some of the characters better, and reading about the psychologist from Annihilation is great. She's an awesome character to learn about. Reading about the lighthouse keeper, who was just a figure, a shape in the background in Annihilation, and gets a very satisfying story in Acceptance, is also great. Does it justify the 700 pages you have to read? Not that much. No, I don't quite think so. The thing Acceptance and Authority add to the trilogy is what I'd like to call maybe its key message slash moral slash think point, which is this idea that Area X, while vaguely apocalyptic, may not be too bad after all, and maybe something that's even preferable to the world as we have it today, because of its effects on the environment, because of the way it turns nature back to a pristine state. But that too is a reflection that was already in Annihilation. It was there, even though it didn't take up too much of that novel. And once more, I didn't think that the two extra volumes justified expanding that moral and that reflection so much. Don't get me wrong, that reflection, the way it is articulated throughout Authority and Acceptance, is amazing. It's great and well nuanced, and the series in its second and third volume also makes some interesting reflection on semiotics, on the linguistics, on the way we create meaning, and possibly its greatest achievement is the way it portrays an enemy, which is kind of nature, an enemy that we cannot really understand or comprehend, because we like to think of the world, of reality, as the human sphere, as, you know, cities, infrastructure, the world as something that's pretty much ours, whereas we are just one part of a much broader system, and not necessarily the most interesting or astonishing bit either. It's very possible I missed some nuances of the depth of this reflection, because I'm someone who grew up in a quintessentially urban environment. I have a pretty big park in my hometown, but that's it. I didn't grow up with wilderness a few steps away. In this sense, this may be a book that resonates more. I'm talking about the second half, the Southern Reach trilogy. Maybe it resonates more with American audiences, or with people living in places where you have extensive wilderness close at hand. But here comes the difficult part. All of these things considered, I'm not that sure I recommend the second and third volume in the Southern Reach trilogy. Annihilation is great, by all means read it. It's amazing, so short, so genius, so faceted and stimulating. Acceptance is a good novel, sure, but is it worth it to go through Authority? And you have to read Authority in order to understand Acceptance. Is it worth to read Authority only so you can enjoy Acceptance? No, I don't think so. What I'm going to say is this. Well, once you finish with Annihilation, read the first 20, 30, 50 pages of Authority, and if you're fascinated with them, if you like what you're reading, what you're getting, by all means carry on, because you're going to have a great time. If you're not so sure, keep in mind that those first chapters, those 40, 50 pages, whatever, are a good representation of what awaits in Authority and in large chunks of Acceptance. So if you're not too convinced, it may not be necessarily worth it to invest the effort it takes to complete the series. But do let me know, especially from people, I want to know especially from people with strong opinions, people who actually enjoyed the second and third volume more than Annihilation. Maybe I'm an exception. It may have something to do with the fact that VanderMeer's third-person narration is very often made of choppy, short sentences, whereas I tend to prefer more baroque, flowery prose. Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching the video. I'll put links on the screen in a second to my review of Annihilation and to something else I filmed, and let me know what passes through your mind in the comments below. I'll see you in the next review. Bye guys.